Mary Lou Williams, it ain't necessarily so. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting in over 750 stations on Pacific and NPR and Low Power FM and college and community stations and PBS and public access TV stations and both TV satellite networks, Dish Network Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410, Link TV, and Direct TV Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. We're here in Washington, D.C., speaking with Washington Post reporter Liza Mundy. She wrote a biography of Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama did not authorize the biography or participate in it. The biography is called Michelle. So she was born in just 6 months before the Civil Rights Act was signed into law in the South Side of Chicago. Michelle LaVaughn Robinson. Where did LaVaughn come from?
LaVaughn was a family name on her father's side. It had been her father's mother's name.
And talk about her growing up, her going to schools in the South Side, and then being moved out, going to school for the gifted, and then what that moving out meant, ultimately going to Princeton.
Yes, well, you know, her mother, Marion, was able to stay home because her father had a job with the city of Chicago, working in a water treatment plant, tending boilers. And, you know, there's not a long tradition in the African-American community of mothers being able to stay home with their children, but her mother was able to do that and taught both Michelle and her older brother, Craig. And so they were both able to read when they went to kindergarten, and she attended a local elementary school where she skipped the second grade and was a very high-performing student, and it was a good local elementary school. And then, right when she was a young teenager, the city of Chicago opened some magnet high schools, in part as an effort to provide African-American children with better school resources than they had had up to then, because along with segregated housing, segregated schools had been a major issue in Chicago as well. And so the city opened up magnet high schools open to children from different parts of the city. And it was also an effort to stem white flight and to keep white students in the city and to get some integrated schools, because obviously cities were under, you know, were being watched by federal authorities to make sure that their school systems became integrated. So, you know, at a very young age, she left every morning her house in South Side, and she took both a bus and a train to go to Whitney Young Magnet High School in a different part of the city. It took about an hour and a half to get there. I was thinking about this because my daughter is 13, and I was thinking, you know, how adventurous, you know, and self-sufficient you need to be as a young teenager to make that trip by yourself every morning. So this was a high school that was for academically motivated students. It provided them with extra resources. And I think it must have been, I talked to a number of her classmates who remember her and described the school as having been a very inclusive and happy place, basically, in the sense that it was integrated. White students, for the most part, came from families that wanted them to be in a diverse environment. And in the mid-70s, that was more unusual than it is now. I think we now accept diversity as something desirable in a school population, but that was a little bit forward-thinking then. And the African-American students were in the majority at the school and held positions of leadership. Michelle was the school treasurer her last 2 years at the school, and she was also in the National Honor Society. And there's a lovely photo in her school yearbook of her standing with the other National Honor Society students, and she's standing beside a white girl named Christy McNulty, who I tracked down in Phoenix. And she remembers the moment when the shutter of the camera went off and Michelle Robinson reached out and put her arm around Christy. And there's a lovely photo of the two of them standing there, well, all of the National Honor Society students, but you can see Michelle Robinson's arm around her white classmate. And she was described as being a very inclusive person who moved between different social groups and didn't confine herself to any one clique. And it just seems to have been a very nice environment in which to learn about, you know, students of other races. And that really would have been her first opportunity, I think.
And Liza Mundy, you write about how she ends up at Princeton, and you talk about her first year. She's rooming with a white classmate, except the white classmate's mother then intervenes.
Yes, this would have been in 1981, and she happened to draw a classmate from the South whose mother was unhappy to find that her daughter had been placed with a black student, and petitioned the school and made phone calls to try and get her moved. And both the classmate and her mother have come forward, in recent months to talk about this and to express their contrition, and to say essentially they realize now that the joke was on them. They're very sorry to recall that episode. And so that unfortunately was her sort of her introduction to the Princeton campus. And I guess I was particularly interested in this part of her life because I was on the campus at about the same time. I started in 1978, and we would have overlapped by a year. And, at that time, women had only been on the campus at Princeton for about a decade. And African Americans were just 10% of the student body and had only been there in any numbers for about the same period of time. And the president of Princeton, William Bowen, was in the vanguard of shaping a national policy on affirmative action, and did believe and still does believe that it's legitimate for universities to take race into consideration in college admissions as one criterion among many. And that policy was favored by many, but was opposed by some alumni and students. And there was a fair amount of crossfire on campus at the time. So once again, Michelle Robinson would have been experiencing the opening up of American landscapes that had been closed to African Americans, but not opening up easily. And it's not like she was really welcomed with open arms. Certainly she was by many, but there was a fair amount of conversation going on. And I talked again to classmates who said that they did not feel completely welcome on campus at the time.
Talk about it has become infamous thesis of Michelle Obama, well then Michelle Robinson, which I thought was very interesting when you laid out exactly what she was trying to do in the survey that she conducted of Black Princeton alumni.
Well, I think that every Princeton alumnus felt, we all felt a collective shudder when we learned that her thesis had been posted online, because, anybody who's written a senior thesis would identify, God forbid my thesis ever be posted online. I know the circumstances under which they're written, and, paragraphs written at the last minute at the suggestion of your advisor, and then 25 years later, somebody's picking over the sentences, to use them against your husband. It's really just mind-boggling. But what she did in her thesis, I mean, she was exploring, I think, as many of us were, the extent to which she had been changed by Princeton. She was exploring, the fact she had come from this large African-American community in Southside Chicago, asking herself, do I still belong to that community? Am I still that person? Or have I been changed by this very different environment that I find myself in? And she surveyed African-American alumni to find out whether they had felt the urge to assimilate into, white society or to self-segregate before they were at Princeton, when they were at Princeton, and after they were at Princeton. And she found that the majority of alumni did find that it was when they were at Princeton that they felt the urge more to stick together. And there was a building on campus called the Third World Center that was available to students of color as, a support, a place just to be together and seek mutual support. And she posited that one reason was because when they were in high school, students would have been able to go home at night to their families. And if they were in integrated high schools, they still would have had the support of their parents at the end of the day. And she posited that perhaps lacking that support network, students turn to each other more in the environment of college than either before or after. And there were times reading her thesis when I just thought that she might have been a young person who missed her family. You get that sense that she missed the support that her parents provided. And her brother Craig was at Princeton for 2 years when she was there. I mean, he was there for 4 years, but he would have graduated her sophomore year. And I think she must have missed him as well.